All right, let's just get this out of the way. The Big Bang Theory is not funny. And I know, but I need you to understand exactly why that matters. See, when people laugh at the Big Bang Theory, they're not laughing because the writers crafted a witty, science-themed joke with both actual intellectual legs to stand on and real humor, because the writing is absolute dog shit. No, when people laugh at the Big Bang Theory, those characters could literally be saying anything, and everyone would still clap and yell, "Look, Sheldon did a science!" The audience isn't responding to cleverness. They're responding to the performance of cleverness. And here's the terrifying part. Most people can't tell the difference. They hear scientific terminology and they assume depth or confidence and mistake it for competence. Or they witness a performance and applaud it as expertise. I think you're seeing where I'm going with this. The Big Bang Theory works because it exploits a fundamental flaw in how humans process information. We mistake complexity for intelligence. And that same flaw, that same inability to distinguish between someone who sounds smart and someone who is smart, that is exactly what is destroying marketing today. And you're listening, so strap in. I've been wrong a lot in my career. But you know what's funny about being right? Nobody wants to hear it. I used to think that the hardest part about spotting frauds, con artists, was the detective work, learning to see through the performance and recognizing patterns and calling out bullshit. That is not the hardest part at all. The hard part is what happens after. It's the silence that follows when you point out that the emperor has no clothes. And I have done it several times. It's the way people look at you like you just ruined Christmas morning, or the realization that most people would rather be lied to by someone confident than told the truth by someone they're not sure they like. I've been shouting into the void for years, and I don't mean in the performative LinkedIn shouting. That's all theater, even though I have done theater a lot in my day, but that's another story. I mean the real kind of shouting, the desperate kind. The 2 a.m. posts hoping anyone would comment back and say, "Holy shit, I thought I was the only one that saw this." Because when you can spot the frauds, when you can see through performance, and when you understand that half the people getting the biggest platforms have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, you start to feel like you're living in a different reality than everyone else. It's like you're watching a magic show, actually, where you can see all the mirrors, but everyone around you is just gasping at the illusion. But the magician, well, the magician's gonna hate you, because you are the one in the audience who just won't play along. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a good sport. I will let someone pull a quarter out from behind my ear. I used to think that I hated bad marketing, but it took me a long time to realize that that's not exactly true. I hate what bad marketing turns good marketers into. The ones who started with real skill and real desire to build something true. But somewhere along the way, they stopped asking if any of it was working and started asking what would get them applause. I've watched brilliant people disappear into the performance. Strategists become content creators. I have watched some of the best practitioners I've ever known become influencers. And when I say influencer, I mean that kind of influencer. And I've sat there, alone, wondering if I was the crazy one for thinking that any of that mattered. I learned to spot charlatans the hard way by watching them get promoted while I got fired. Remember that Birmingham boardroom? The one where I closed a $17 million deal that the suits couldn't? Yeah, 2 months later, they fired me for insubordination, and then in the same breath said it wasn't a culture fit. Not because I was wrong, but because I was right. They just didn't like the way I did it. Instead of focusing on the substance and the outcome, they didn't like the tone. And being right in front of people who were performing expertise, that is unforgivable. That was my first real education into how this industry actually works. It was the lesson that wasn't about marketing, it was about power, about who gets to be the expert and who gets to stay in the room. The suits didn't fire me because the strategy was bad. They fired me because it worked better than theirs. Call it what it is. Because when you're surrounded by people who are faking their way through it, competence actually becomes a threat. But it took me years to understand the full scope of what I was actually seeing. I thought it was just that agency, just those people, just bad luck, whatever. Boy, was I wrong. Very wrong. It is systemic. I started paying attention to who got hired, who got promoted, who got the platforms, and I noticed a pattern. The people rising to the top weren't the ones with the deepest knowledge or the best results. They were the ones with the best performances. Okay, you've heard me talk about this before, but let's briefly talk about our B2B, the de-anonymization platform that I've just ripped to shreds. Take Adam Robinson, CEO of our B2B. Before he became the Inbound-led-Outbound guru, before he started hawking surveillance tools to desperate sales teams, you know what he did? Take a guess. Nope. He wasn't a marketer, wasn't in sales. He traded credit default swaps for Lehman Brothers. Yeah, you heard that correctly. And if you were a breathing human being around 2008, you know how that story ended. Mortgages, data, it's all the same. But here's the thing. That background doesn't disqualify him from being a marketing expert. He learned the language. And the language, as it turns out, is enough. So can you fault him? I will. Because most people in this industry can't tell the difference between someone who knows the words and someone who understands the work. I started documenting this, not publicly, not yet, but just for my own sanity. The consultant who built a $1 million agency selling growth frameworks that were just repackaged funnel math. You still see that crap today. Or a VP that got hired because he could talk about full funnel attribution, but couldn't explain what it actually measured. I know you've seen these. The conference speaker who gives presentations about buyer journey optimization based entirely on case studies that they had read but never actually executed. Each time it was the same pattern. Confident language, zero substance, 100% total success. And each time I tried to point it out, carefully, diplomatically, I was told that I was being too critical, that the industry needed thought leadership, that these people were pushing the conversation forward, but they weren't pushing anything forward. They were recycling old ideas with new vocabulary and selling shortcuts to people who didn't know they were buying detours. That's where you get terms like Nearbound and Allbound and Inbound-led-Outbound and just whatever. I've said for the longest time, if I see another LinkedIn post about marketing with the word bound in it, I am calling the police, because all of these people are making up terms for things that already have names. And if they were actually marketers, they would know that. But that's what happens. They come into this industry and they don't want to actually make it better. They don't want to help. They just want to be known as the person that came up with the next big thing. The breaking point for me came actually at a conference in 2019. I won't name it, but you've heard of it. One of the big ones. I was sitting in the back of a session about the future with AI and yada, 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 the precursor to what we know now. AI-powered customer journey orchestration, preparing for whatever. The speaker, let's call him Derek, was explaining how his platform used machine learning to predict buyer behavior. Okay, impressive slides, very confident delivery. Oh look, a room full of nodding heads. Cool. But I knew Derek. We'd actually worked together 3 years earlier. Back then, he was selling email automation software and couldn't explain why open rates were declining. Fun fact, didn't actually know what the acronym DMARC was. Now, he was on stage talking about predictive analytics like he invented the concept entirely. During Q&A, someone asked about data quality. He launched into a 5-minute response about multi-dimensional attribution modeling, and that said absolutely nothing. And guess what? The crowd went wild. Everybody applauded. Everybody loved it. Ate that shit up. And I realized they weren't applauding the answer. They were applauding the performance. Most of them didn't understand what he was talking about either, but they assumed that because they didn't understand it, it must be advanced. That's when I understood the full scope of what we were dealing with and a lot of what we're dealing with today. It isn't a bug in the system at all. It is very much a feature. The industry rewards incomprehensible complexity because complexity sounds like expertise, period. It promotes people that can make simple things sound extremely complicated, rather than people who can make complicated things simple. It elevates performers over practitioners, because most buyers of marketing services cannot tell the difference for some reason. So, yeah, I started saying this shit out loud. Not carefully, not diplomatically. I called Derek out by name. I exposed the consultants' recycled frameworks. I documented the entire surveillance economy that Adam Robinson and his ilk were building. And the response was swift and very predictable. That I was gatekeeping, that I was negative, that I was trying to hold the industry back. But here's what none of them could say: that I was wrong. Because I wasn't wrong. I was just inconvenient. Inconvenient to those people making money selling repackaged common sense. Inconvenient to the conferences that needed speakers more than they needed people that actually knew what the hell they were talking about. And of course, I was inconvenient to the ecosystem that had been built around performance rather than substance. Let me tell you, the isolation is brutal. Not just professional, existential. I mean that. I'd spent years trying to get good at marketing. I learned from some of the best on the planet: practitioners, theorists, strategists, you name it. Studying campaigns that actually worked, understanding buyer psychology, brand positioning, message market fit, all of it. All the math, all the craft, and everything in between. But then suddenly I was surrounded by people who had never done any of that work, but were teaching others how to do it. Make that make sense to me. There were people who learned how to sound smart without ever actually having to be smart. People who built entire careers on other people's case studies, or, worse, they just made the shit up. Because guess what? There are no reference checks for case studies. It's people that treated marketing like a performance art rather than a craft. It just makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to anybody that gives a shit. But when I pointed this out, of course, I was the problem. I would lie awake at 3 a.m. wondering if I was losing my mind, if maybe everyone else was right, and I was just bitter. Seriously, I struggled with that a lot. Maybe I was the charlatan. Maybe they were experts. Maybe attribution really did work the way they said it did. Or intent data wasn't just recycled guessing. These frameworks and methodologies actually meant something. Maybe I'd spent years listening to the wrong things. Maybe competence was overrated and performance was what actually mattered. Maybe I should stop fighting and learn to play the game. But then the DMs started rolling in. It was quiet at first, from people who'd read my post and recognized something familiar, I thought I was the only one that could see this. Thank you for saying what I was thinking, but afraid to post. I've been doing this for 15 years and I feel like I don't recognize the industry anymore. Each message felt like finding a signal in the static. One by one, they found me. Or I found them, the refugees from the performance economy, the ones who still believed marketing was supposed to be about understanding people and not manipulating them. I've always said that marketers have no idea the kind of power that they actually have, and they have to make a conscious effort at some point in their career to use those powers for good. Slowly, I started to understand what had happened to our industry. It wasn't that charlatans had invaded marketing. It's that marketing had become a place where charlatans could thrive. It is where performance, like I said, was rewarded among everything else. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. It was designed to promote people who could present over people who could actually deliver. And I know that in saying that, someone just popped in your mind. But the people that were caught in the middle, the ones who actually knew what they were doing, We became dissidents and troublemakers, the ones who asked uncomfortable questions and demanded evidence. God forbid. This is the cost of clarity. When you see everything for what it is, I'm sorry to drag you into this, but you can't unsee it. Because when you understand the difference between the tactics and strategy, you can't pretend they're the same thing. And when you know what good marketing actually looks like, your brain will not allow you to abide or applaud the theater. And that's what actually makes you dangerous in this industry, not to buyers, not to clients, not to the people marketing is supposed to serve. Dangerous to the ecosystem that was built around serving itself in an industry that's forgotten what it was actually supposed to be about in the first place. So here we are, 5 episodes in, me talking into a microphone, hoping you understand what I'm really saying. But okay if you don't. Because this isn't just about marketing. It's about what happens when an industry loses the ability to distinguish between, it all comes back to competence versus performance. Because right now we're living through the consequences of that transformation. Buyers who don't trust us, tactics that don't work, budgets that get wasted on tools that promise magic but deliver disappointment and usually severance packages. But here's what I've learned from finding my tribe. We're not alone. There are more of us than you think. And if you're listening to this, welcome. You know, there are tons of marketing directors that know that attribution sucks and CMOs that see enough vendor pitches that, geez. We've been finding each other in the DMs, the comments, the quiet moments between all these ridiculous performances. And we're building a network of people who refuse to pretend anymore. And if you're listening to this, if you've made it through these first 5 episodes of Reach, processing the cost of staying honest in a dishonest industry, you are probably one of us. That mix of rage and grief and determination. Rage at what this industry has become, grief for what it used to be, and determination to help it remember what it was supposed to be about and what it can be. All right, so what now? I can't promise you that this gets easier. I can't promise you won't face consequences or that you won't feel isolated when you refuse to applaud anymore. But I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. You're not crazy. You're not alone. And you're not wrong. The emperor has no clothes. The charlatans are running the asylum. Have no doubt. But the only way we fix this is by refusing to play along. One uncomfortable question and inconvenient truth at a time. Until there are enough of us that the performance just stops working. Because eventually, if you call them out enough, the charlatans have to find a new industry to infiltrate. This is Reach. 5 episodes of processing what it costs to stay human in an industry that rewards being fake. Mourning what marketing used to be while fighting for what it could become. And finding your tribe in the wreckage of what was supposed to be a profession. If this is the last episode you listen to, that's fine. You got what you needed. But if you're still here, if you're still listening, if you recognize yourself in any of these stories, welcome to the resistance. We've been waiting for you. Thanks for listening. If this hits something real, pass it on. Reach is where I process the cost. I expose the system that created it. You can subscribe to both if you're done pretending that any of this is normal. One is for the silence, one is for the fire. Visit burnitdown.marketing to go deeper. And if you want more Reach, subscribe or leave a review. That's how things keep going.